The rain poured like judgment, merciless and cold. No one would stop on that kind of night, especially not for what looked like roadkill. But she did. Grace Monroe, 28, single mother waitress in a forgotten town, stepped out of her beat-up truck without an umbrella, without hesitation. Curled on the roadside was a golden retriever, bleeding, trembling, half buried in mud. Everyone else had driven past, maybe assuming it was too late, maybe just not caring. Grace knelt, hair-soaked hands bare, whispering not out of pity, but recognition. "You're not dying alone, not tonight. Who does that for a stray? For something the world already gave up on?" Maybe because Grace had once been left in the rain, too, and maybe this wasn't just a rescue, it was a beginning. What happened after that will change the way you see quiet kindness, forever. Stay. This isn't just a story about a dog, it's about all of us. She didn't need to know why. She just knew she couldn't drive away. Grace Monroe wasn't the kind of woman who overthought things. At 28, she lived in a quiet corner of Millfield, Pennsylvania. Just her and her 6-year-old daughter Lily in a small house with chipped paint and a porch that creaked when the wind blew. She worked mornings at Dottie's Diner, kneading dough, pouring coffee, listening more than speaking. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. But when someone dropped their keys, she bent down first. When a storm came, she always checked on the neighbor's porch plants. So, when she saw that dog bleeding, barely breathing, Grace didn't freeze. She didn't scroll her phone. She didn't talk herself out of it. She lifted it gently, cradled it like a child, and placed it in the passenger seat. Rain soaked her hair, her clothes. She didn't care. Some people call it impulse. Others call it instinct. Grace just called it what you do when no one's watching. The house smelled like cinnamon and something older, maybe rain-soaked wood or worn-out hope. Grace laid the dog down gently on a folded bath towel right in the middle of the living room floor. The heater clicked on in the hallway. Lily was asleep down the hall, unaware of the half-drenched stranger now sharing their roof. The dog didn't move. Its breathing was shallow, one paw twitching slightly. Grace grabbed the first aid kit. She wasn't a vet. She barely knew what she was doing. But still, she cleaned the wound. She whispered soft things. She wrapped the leg the way her father once taught her when he splinted a bird's wing with a pencil and gauze. Her father once told her on a 4th of July night when the fireworks made him flinch. You don't have to be loud to be brave. She never forgot that, especially when she had to be brave quietly for years with no one watching. She didn't post about it, didn't call anyone for credit. She just did what she could. Not because the dog would thank her, not because anyone would know, but because there was no part of her that could turn away from pain and pretend it wasn't hers too. And when it whimpered softly, barely audible, Grace just nodded. "You're safe," she said mostly to herself. A soft rustle. Then a whisper. Mama Lily stood at the edge of the hallway, pajama sleeves too long for her arms. Hair tangled from sleep. Her bare feet made no sound on the old linoleum floor. She saw the dog before she saw the blood. Instead of fear, there was wonder in her eyes. She tiptoed forward, crouched low beside the folded towel. "Is he gonna die?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Grace knelt beside her. "I don't know, baby, but we're trying not to let him." Lily reached out slowly. The dog didn't flinch. Its tail gave one tiny thump against the towel. Lily smiled. "His name is Scout," she said with absolute certainty. Grace blinked. "Why Scout?" "Because he looks like he's been on an adventure, and he found us." That night, 3 beings shared the same room, one wounded, one wide-eyed, one exhausted, and somehow a family began to form, not through blood, not through planning, but through the kind of quiet bond only the heart recognizes. By morning, the storm had passed, but inside the questions had only begun. Grace stood by the stove pouring 2 cups of hot cocoa. One for Lily, one for herself. She glanced at the living room where Scout still lay motionless except for his eyes open now following her every move. She had called the local vet. They could squeeze her in around noon. Bring proof of ownership, they said. Vaccination records if you have them. She didn't. She had a soaked towel, a bloodied floor, and a child who had already named him Family. Grace stared at her reflection in the kitchen window. Messy hair, tired eyes, lips pressed tight. No one would blame her if she dropped him off at the shelter. Said she tried. But no part of her body moved in that direction, because something in her chest whispered, "You don't give up on things just because they're broken." So she sighed, picked up her keys, and told Lily, "Let's go, kiddo. We've got a vet visit today." Lily beamed. Scout lifted his head. And in that moment, Grace had already made the decision she wouldn't admit out loud. He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The vet clinic smelled like antiseptic and dog biscuits. Grace sat on the cold bench in the waiting room, Lily tucked under one arm, Scout curled at her feet on an old fleece blanket, a bandage wrapped loosely around his side. His fur still looked rough, but his eyes, those had changed. He didn't flinch at the sounds anymore. He didn't tremble when the door opened. Dr. Ames, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, had said the wound would heal. He's lucky, he'd murmured, running a hand over Scout's spine. Or maybe it's more than luck. Grace didn't answer. She didn't tell him how close she'd come to leaving the dog there. She didn't tell him about the doubt, the fear, the math that didn't add up. Instead, she watched Lily trace her finger along Scout's paw, and for the first time in weeks, Grace felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty, not relief, just quiet. A kind of quiet that whispered, "This matters. Keep going." The bill came to $213.47. Grace folded the receipt and slipped it into her coat pocket without a word. The vet had been offered a discount, threw in a free bag of kibble, but even so, the number echoed in her head as she drove home groceries, gas, utilities. Rent due in 10 days. Lily hummed in the back seat, her hand resting gently on Scout's back. The dog panted softly, eyes closing every few seconds as if sleep was finally safe again. Grace didn't say anything, didn't sigh, didn't let her hands shake on the wheel, because that's how she'd survived this far, by not complaining even when the ceiling leaked, by showing up even when her shoes had holes, by keeping everything together so Lily wouldn't feel the cracks. And now, with a dog she didn't plan for and a life barely stitched at the seams, she did what she always did. She chose to keep going, silently, fiercely, fully. Scout didn't bark, he didn't jump, he didn't demand anything. But, somehow, his presence filled the house. Grace noticed it first in the mornings, how Lily got out of bed faster, how her small feet pattered eagerly toward the living room where Scout waited, tail-thumping softly against the couch. The air felt warmer, not from the heater, but from something harder to name. Like stillness that didn't feel lonely anymore. Grace caught herself humming while packing lunches. She swept the floor without resentment. Paid bills with the same stress, but a quieter kind of stress, one that came with a strange companion meaning. It wasn't magic. The house was still old. The mailbox still coughed up bad news. But when Grace walked through the door at the end of a long day, there was always a soft-eyed dog waiting and a daughter smiling just a little wider. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It was a Tuesday morning when Mrs. Donnelly noticed him. The older woman came into Dottie's diner like she always did, hairpinned tight lipstick a little too red for 9 a.m., but heart always in the right place. She glanced through the window, paused, and squinted. "That dog out front," she said, nodding toward the sidewalk where Scout sat waiting patiently. "He looks familiar." Grace wiped the counter, heart suddenly alert. "He's mine. Sort of." Mrs. Donnelly narrowed her eyes. "You sure that scar on his leg? I swear I've seen him before. Maybe at the VFW picnic last year." Grace went still. Scout hadn't had a tag. No chip, no collar, but now there, it was a tiny, dented military-style tag tucked under his makeshift bandana. Grace hadn't seen it before. Maybe it had been hidden. Maybe it hadn't been meant to be found yet. Suddenly, Scout wasn't just theirs. He belonged to a story bigger than her kitchen and her quiet routines. And the past had just started to knock. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, curled up next to Scout on the couch, Grace sat at the kitchen table with the dog tag in her hand. It was small, scratched, and cold. Stamped into the metal were 4 things: a last name, Wells, an ID number, a blood type, and the word U.S. Army. Grace stared at it for a long time. She didn't know why it mattered so much. Scout was here now, he was safe, loved. But still, something about the silence behind that name, Janitor, felt unfinished. She opened her laptop and typed slowly, Military Dog Tag Lookup, Veteran Support, Lost Dog Tags. No agenda, no expectations. Just this quiet pull inside her chest, like a thread that needed to be followed even if she didn't know where it led. Because somewhere out there someone had once loved this dog enough to put their name on his collar. And Grace. She'd spent her whole life listening for the things no one else could hear. 2 days later, a man walked into Dottie's diner. Late 40s, quiet posture, faded army jacket. He sat at table 6, ordered black coffee, and stared out the window where Scout, still tagless around his neck but unmistakable, waited under the old oak. When Grace brought over the cup, he didn't look up. Instead, he said softly, "That your dog?" Grace hesitated. "Sort of. He found us." The man finally turned his head. His eyes were sharp but tired in the way only grief makes them. "That dog was with Logan Wells. I served with him." Grace blinked. "You know the name?" He nodded once. Everyone in the unit did. Scout wasn't just a dog. He was trained for trauma response, helped vets through the dark. Logan wouldn't have let him go unless something happened. He reached into his coat, pulled out a photo. 6 soldiers in desert fatigues. And at the center, Scout, younger but unmistakable, seated at the feet of a man whose face was half bandaged. "Logan disappeared 2 years ago," the man said. "You're the first sign we've had since." And just like that, Scout's story became bigger than Grace's living room, and hers became woven into something she never saw coming. That night, Grace sat on the porch with Scout beside her head, resting on her bare feet. The photo lay in her lap. 6 men, 1 dog, and a silence that now had a name, Logan Wells. No one had asked her to do anything. The man at table 6 didn't beg for help, didn't even leave a number, just said, "If you hear anything, let someone know." But Grace couldn't stop thinking about it. A man disappeared. A dog wandered wounded and alone across state lines. And now they were in her orbit. She could have walked away, kept the dog, let the past stay buried. But something in her resisted the idea. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was about something quieter. Someone somewhere might still be waiting to know that Scout was alive. And Grace. She knew what waiting in silence felt like. She stood, kissed Scout on the head, and whispered, "If I were lost, I'd hope someone like me would go looking." The next morning, before the sun had even lifted from the cornfields, Grace sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and an open laptop. Scout lay curled by the back door. Lily still slept, her hand clutched around a stuffed bear and one of Scout's ears. On the screen, a blank email draft. Subject: missing veteran. Logan Wells. To contact at veteransconnect.org. She hesitated. The cursor blinked like it was waiting for her to find the right words. Not dramatic, not desperate, just real. She typed slowly. "I'm not sure if this is the right place, but a dog wandered into my life, hurt alone and wearing a tag with the name Logan Wells. Someone told me he served. Someone else told me he disappeared. I don't know what I can do, but I thought you should know he's not entirely lost." She signed her name, paused, then hit send. She didn't expect a reply. She wasn't looking for applause, but something in her knew this tiny act could be a thread. And sometimes one thread is enough to start pulling a whole story back together. The email came at 2:17 a.m. Grace didn't see it until the next morning, in that half-dreamy hour when the coffee hadn't quite kicked in and Lily was still brushing her teeth to the rhythm of a song only she could hear. The subject line read, R.E. Logan Wells. Urgent follow-up. Her hands paused on the keyboard. She clicked. Dear Ms. Monroe, we received your message and would like to speak with you as soon as possible. Logan Wells is listed as an inactive, unaccounted-for veteran since 2021. His family has had no confirmed contact in over 2 years. The dog you described, Scout, was registered as a trauma companion and last seen in Arizona. Please confirm your availability for a call. There may be more to this than you realize. Sincerely, Veterans Connect Outreach Division. Grace leaned back in her chair. Breath caught somewhere between her ribs. This was real. She didn't just rescue a stray. She'd stumbled into someone's missing piece. And now, she wasn't just part of a story, she was the link someone out there had been praying for. The call came just after noon. Grace stepped outside with her phone pressed to her ear, Scout trailing behind her and leaned against the porch railing. The wind tugged gently at her sweater. The voice on the other end was calm, older, weathered. Ms. Monroe, I'm Michael Tate, Regional Director with Veterans Connect. I served with Logan a long time ago. There was a pause, not out of hesitation but reverence. He saved my life once, dragged me out of a convoy fire in Kandahar, refused to leave even when the second explosion hit. That man would give you the shirt off his back and ask if you needed his boots, too. Grace swallowed. When he got back, Michael continued, he started volunteering with trauma units. That dog scout, he trained him himself. Logan was never loud, never wanted credit. But he saw people, really saw them. Another pause. And then one day, he vanished. Grace looked down at Scout, who lay in a patch of sunlight like nothing in the world could go wrong. She said quietly, I think he's still out there. I don't know how, but I think Scout's trying to bring him home. Michael exhaled. Then we'll help you find him. And, Ms. Monroe, yes, thank you. Not just for the email, but for giving that dog and maybe Logan a reason to be seen again. Grace didn't pack a suitcase. She didn't quit her job. There was no dramatic montage, no car speeding toward the sunset. Just a shift, a small steady one. She started calling shelters first in Pennsylvania, then neighboring states. Left voicemails, filled out contact forms. She asked for records, military rehab centers, PTSD clinics. Anyone who might have seen a man with a burned face and a dog named Scout. She got no answers, not at first. Sometimes no one called back at all, but she kept going. One email, one message, one thread at a time. At the diner, she smiled like usual, poured coffee. But at night, after Lily was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table, her laptop glowing in the dark, Scout asleep by her feet. No one asked her to carry this, but she did, quietly, faithfully, because some burdens don't feel heavy when they're carried with purpose. And Grace had learned something. You don't have to save the world. Just hold the light long enough for someone else to find their way. No headlines, no hashtags, just a woman, a dog, and a reason that only made sense in her chest. Every night, after Lily fell asleep, cheek pressed against Scout's side like he was a stuffed animal that breathed. Grace opened her laptop and picked up where she left off. She made a list: shelters, VA clinics, discharge centers, transitional housing units, soup kitchens near old bases. She called, emailed, left polite voicemails, waited. No one promised anything. Some didn't answer. Some said no. One said, too long gone. But Grace never marked a name off the list. She highlighted them, so she could go back later, just in case, because that's how she'd always survived, not by kicking down doors, but by showing up again and again, even when no one noticed. That was her strength, not noise, not force, just staying. Some people fight with fire. Grace fought with presence. And Scout. He never left her side. The message came on a Thursday. Grace almost missed it, just a blinking red light on the diner's landline buried under receipts and napkin orders. She played it during cleanup, half distracted, one hand on the broom. Hi. This is Beth from Wilton Community Resource Center. I think you called a few weeks ago about a man named Logan Wells. Grace froze. I wasn't sure at first, but one of our volunteers saw your flyer at the VFW hall and said it looked like someone who came through here, maybe 6 months back. Burn scars. Walked with a limp. quiet. She paused, the message heart pounding. Scout, curled under the corner booth, lifted his head, like he felt it too. Grace hit play again. No forwarding address, said he was heading north. But he left something, a note. Just one sentence taped to the donation jar. Beth's voice softened. It said, "Still breathing, still looking. Tell Scout I'm proud of him." Grace pressed her palm to her chest. No name, no phone. Just a line from a ghost who hadn't given up yet, and now neither would she. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table long after Lily was in bed, after Scout had curled into his usual spot by the heater, and after the house had gone still in that way only old houses do, creaking softly like they're trying to remember things. In front of her, a diner napkin. On it, a shaky line drawn from Millfield to Wilton and then north. No street names, no plan, just a direction. Like her heart was pointing somewhere her head couldn't define. She didn't ask permission, didn't post about it, didn't make it a big deal. The next morning, she told Nora, the diner's owner, "I need 2 days off, maybe 3. Nora raised an eyebrow. Vacation. Grace just smiled. More like, follow-up. Nora nodded. "We'll cover your shift." And that was that. No fanfare, no drama. Just a woman with a full tank of gas, a printed photo of a man she'd never met, and a dog in the passenger seat who somehow seemed to understand. She looked at Scout before pulling out of the driveway. "Let's go find your person." And then they were gone. On a road with no guarantees, only the quiet certainty that this was the next right thing. Wilton wasn't big. Blink twice and you'd miss the post office. Grace parked near the community center. Scout leapt down beside her tail, still ears up. She wasn't sure what she expected. Applause. A clue taped to a street lamp. Instead, she got pieces. The woman at the front desk blinked when she saw the photo. I remember him. Quiet, tipped well, wore gloves even in July. The clerk at the gas station added another piece, asked about bus routes, headed north. Took nothing but a backpack and a broken smile. At the soup kitchen, a veteran named Pete paused mid-bite, stared at the image and muttered, "Didn't talk," but he listened. Brought leftover bread even when he had none. And each story, each tiny act was like Scout's tag-dented scuffed but undeniably real. Grace wrote them down on folded receipts, napkins, corners of envelopes. Her purse filled with names, moments, places. No one had the full picture. But together they remembered him, and that Grace realized was what community really meant. Not the people who stay forever, but the ones who help you keep searching when someone's lost. The sun was going down when she found the last lead. Grace had just stepped out of a thrift store, Scout, nosing at a bag of used sweaters when a man in his 60s approached. Ball cap, limp in his left leg, quiet kind of steady. "Excuse me," he said, pointing to the photo still half-folded in her hand. "You looking for this guy?" Her breath caught. "Do you know him?" He didn't answer right away, just reached into his back pocket and pulled out a crumpled sticky note already fading at the edges. "I run the bus depot." Man, matching his look, came through a while back. Left this on the seat. Grace took the note. In blocky handwriting, barely legible, it read North Ridge. Last place quiet enough to forget. No signature, no date. The man added he paid in cash. No ID, but he left the dog's leash behind. That felt like something. Grace stared at the paper fingers, trembling just enough to feel it. She didn't know what North Ridge was. A town. A lookout point. A dead end. But something inside her, the same thing that stopped for a bleeding dog in the rain, whispered, "Go." Even if it's nothing, especially if it is. She folded the note, looked at Scout. He was already facing north. The sign for North Ridge wasn't much, just a dented metal marker half swallowed by weeds. No population count, no welcome slogan, just a name. Grace slowed the truck. Scout sat upright in the passenger seat, alert but calm, like he knew where they were going before she did. The road narrowed. Trees leaned in close branches like ribs caging the sky. Her GPS lost signal 2 turns ago. no cell service, just the sound of gravel under tires and the occasional crack of something unseen in the woods. Most people would have turned around. She didn't, because this quiet, this stillness, this strange hush. It felt familiar, like the kind of place someone broken might go to disappear, the kind of place where a man might sit alone with his scars and 1,000 questions he didn't want answered. She pulled over at the first clearing, heart thudding with no rhythm, no sign of life. But when she opened her door, Scout didn't wait. He jumped down, sniffed the air once, then bolted. Scout. No bark, just movement, purpose. Grace didn't hesitate. She ran after him, because somewhere in those trees, something was waiting, and she was done leaving things behind. The forest opened suddenly like the trees had been guarding something. Grace stumbled into a clearing. Breath, short hands scraped from branches. Scout stood perfectly still a few feet ahead, tail wagging low and slow. And across from them, beside a small stone fire pit, sat a man. Not young, not old, shoulders hunched, beanie pulled low. Hands resting in his lap, fingers tracing the edge of a tin cup like he couldn't decide if he was cold or simply used to being alone. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, the scar across his cheek caught the last light of day. Scout whimpered, and Logan Wells whispered, "You came." Grace stepped forward. Slowly. No sudden movements. "I didn't know if I'd find you," she said. He gave a tired smile, small but real. "I didn't know if I wanted to be found." She sat across from him, knees in the dirt, no questions on her tongue. Just the sound of wind and the truth sitting between them. "I brought someone," she said, nodding toward Scout. Logan looked at the dog eyes, wet but steady. He remembered. Grace didn't speak, didn't try to fix him, didn't ask why he left, because sometimes the kindest thing isn't demanding a reason. It's just showing up and staying. The fire crackled softly between them as if even the flames knew better than to interrupt. Logan stared into the smoke, not at Grace. "I left Scout behind on purpose," he said finally. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in a while. "He followed me through 3 states, slept beside me through seizures, kept me alive when I didn't ask him to." Grace said nothing, just listened, the kind of silence that invites someone to keep going. I thought, if I cut the last tether, maybe I'd stop pretending I was still someone people should wait for. He glanced at her just once. "You ever feel like the world moved on and forgot to tell you?" Grace nodded slowly. "I felt like the background of my own life. A mother, a worker, a face people see every day and never really look at." Logan looked down. "Then why'd you come?" She didn't flinch. "Because someone should." He didn't reply, but his shoulders dropped just slightly. And in that space between their pain, something began to loosen. Not forgiveness, not healing, just permission to keep breathing. The fire had burned low. The sky above them turned from ash to ink. Logan sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at the dirt like it might give him an answer. Scout had fallen asleep against his side. No leash, no command, just presence. Grace reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out across the fire. "I'm not here to take you anywhere you don't want to go." He hesitated. "It's just a schedule," she added, "from the Wilton Vet Center. They have open coffee hours on Thursdays. No forms, no names, just chairs." Logan took the paper but didn't look at it. Then Grace said quieter, "I go. I'm not a vet. They let me come anyway." He looked up. "I just listen," she added. "Sometimes I talk. Most days I don't. But..." It helped to not be invisible anymore. For a long time, Logan didn't say anything. Then, "You think they'd let a ghost sit in?" Grace gave the softest smile. "Ghosts get the front row." She stood. No pressure, no farewell. Just the warmth of a fire that no longer belonged to one person alone. And as she walked back toward the truck, Scout stayed by Logan's side just a little longer. Millfield hadn't changed. The same cracked sidewalks, the same flickering light above the post office, the same pie of the day sign outside Dottie's Diner still missing the E. But Grace had. She pulled into the driveway just after sundown. The porch light she'd left on still glowed faintly like the house had been waiting. Not worried, just faithful. Lily came flying out the front door, barefoot, wild-haired, her arms flung open. Scout trailed close behind as if they'd never left. Grace knelt, let her daughter crash into her chest. "I missed you," Lily mumbled into her sweater. Grace kissed her hair. "I missed you more." Inside, everything was as she left it, mail-piled laundry half-folded, the weight of real life waiting. But something in the air had shifted. She moved through the rooms with a steadiness she hadn't noticed before. Not stronger, just rooted. The kind that comes when you've stepped outside of what's comfortable and found out you're more capable than the world gave you credit for. Grace didn't save anyone out there. She didn't come home with a miracle, but she came home more herself. And that quietly changed everything. It started with a pie. 2 days after Grace returned, she found it on her porch, still warm, wrapped in a dish towel, with no note, no name. She brought it inside. Apple cinnamon, the kind Nora never had time to bake. The next morning, a bag of carrots showed up on her front steps. Then, a sealed envelope with no return address and a single sentence inside. "Thank you for reminding us what quiet bravery looks like." At the diner, customers lingered longer. A few asked gentle questions. "You were gone, huh?" Everything okay, but there was no gossip in their tone. Only curiosity softened by respect. One old veteran came in and left a single coin on the counter beside his plate. "For the dog," he said, and the one who followed him. Grace didn't know what to say, so she said what she always did. "Thanks for coming in." But her eyes said more. Because for the first time since the storm that started it all, she felt it. She wasn't just surviving in this town anymore. She was seen. She was part of it. And slowly, without asking, the town had begun to move toward her like a tide, meeting a steady shore. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the bell above the diner door rang softer than usual. Grace didn't look up right away. She was balancing a tray of pie slices, her mind on the drip in the coffee pot and whether Lily had remembered her spelling list. Then Scout barked just once. Not loud, not frantic, just recognition. She turned. Logan stood near the entrance, shoulders squared but hands deep in his coat pockets. He wore civilian clothes. Flannel, jeans. The beanie was gone. His face still bore the scars, but his eyes, they didn't hide anymore. He gave a small nod, almost apologetic. "Hope the coffee's still as bad as I remember." Grace blinked, then laughed quietly. Worse, actually. She didn't rush to him, didn't make a scene. She just slid a mug across the counter and said, "Sit. You look like someone who might stay a while." He did. Scout laid at his feet. No speeches, no dramatic music. Just the clink of ceramic and the soft hum of belonging. Because sometimes coming back doesn't require permission. Just the invitation to not be a stranger anymore. Logan didn't move in. He didn't need to, but he started showing up. First, it was the diner's back door hinge squeaky for months. One morning, it was just fixed. Then the shelves at the library realigned and rebolted after hours. No one asked, no one paid. He just noticed things and made them better. People talked, sure, but softly, with a tone reserved not for gossip, but for things almost sacred. That's him, isn't it? The one who was gone. Grace didn't confirm. She didn't need to. Because Logan wasn't returning to be explained, he was returning to belong in his own way, his own pace. And Grace. She watched the town begin to orbit differently. Scout greeted regulars like old friends. Veterans began dropping by not just for coffee, but for silence they didn't have to explain. Lily once asked if Logan was part of the house now. Grace smiled. Maybe not the house, but definitely the porch. Because some people don't kick doors open when they heal. They repair what's loose and let that be enough. It started with soup. Grace posted a handwritten flyer outside the diner community dinner. Tuesday, 6 p.m. No speeches, just food. Bring what you can. Or just bring yourself. No RSVP, no formality. Just an invitation. The first night she expected 5 people. 17 showed up. Old neighbors, a retired nurse, a teenager who usually ate alone, a mechanic with grease still on his hands, and in the far corner barely touching his plate sat a man Grace hadn't seen in years, Mr. Harlow, who stopped going out after his wife passed. No one asked why he came. They just made room. Logan stood by the wall holding a tray. He didn't sit. He didn't talk much, but he smiled. And when one vet dropped his fork from trembling fingers, Logan quietly picked it up, handed him a clean one, and said, "Take your time." No applause followed. No one filmed it, but something invisible passed between them. Later that night, someone taped a note to the door. "Thanks for reminding us we're still welcome, even if we forgot how to ask." Grace didn't know who wrote it. She just tucked it into the cookie jar on her counter. Because sometimes community doesn't need structure. It just needs someone brave enough to set the table first. That night, after the last bowl had been washed and the last chair stacked, Grace found Lily curled on the couch beside Scout coloring. Logan sat nearby, half reading an old book with the spine cracked wide. Lily looked up, crayon in hand. "Mama." "Yes, sweetie." She tapped the paper. "Why do you and Logan help people you don't even know?" Grace blinked, smiled, thought. Before she could answer, Logan closed his book and said softly, "Because sometimes someone helped us first, even if they didn't know us either." Lily nodded like that made perfect sense. Then, "So it's like..." Passing the flashlight in the dark, Grace felt her throat tighten. Logan smiled. "Yeah, just like that." Lily went back to coloring, this time adding a flashlight to the stick figures holding hands. Grace didn't explain further, because in that moment her daughter didn't need philosophy. She just needed to know that kindness wasn't a reward system, it was a language. And they were fluent. Spring came early that year. Soft rains, kind light. The kind of breeze that carried second chances in its quiet rhythm. One morning, Grace walked out to her backyard and found Logan already there, sleeves rolled, shovel in hand. He didn't say much, just nodded toward the patch of earth behind the shed. "Ground's soft," he said. "Good time to plant." And so they did. Tomatoes, peas, a row of carrots crooked as laughter. Scout supervised from the porch, tail swishing. Lily painted a sign for the fence. "If you're hungry, pick something. No rules, no lock. Just trust." The neighbors started leaving seedlings in paper cups. Someone donated mulch. A boy from the high school built a compost bin as part of his community hours, then stayed to water for the rest of the month. Nobody called it a program. Nobody made a spreadsheet. It just happened. Because sometimes when you make space without demanding anything, growth becomes inevitable. They didn't post about the garden, didn't tag it, name it, or pose beside it. But people noticed anyway. Someone from the local paper stopped by, said she'd heard things. Grace offered her tea, showed her around, said nothing poetic. "It's just vegetables." She smiled. But the reporter wrote a column that week anyway, "The Quiet Things That Feed Us." Then came a phone call from a small podcast. Then a letter from a school in the next county. Then a woman showed up from 2 towns over just to walk the rows and cry in silence by the cucumbers. Grace didn't change her routine. She still opened the diner at 6. Still tucked Lily in with 2 kisses and a light scratch behind Scout's ears. Still made 1 extra plate at dinner just in case. And Logan, he kept building. A bench, a rain barrel, a new gate for the neighbor's fence. One evening, someone said to him, "You're a good man." He didn't say thank you, didn't deflect. He just looked out at the garden and said, "I'm learning from someone who didn't give up on me." And that was the story. Not the garden, not the press, but the kind of people who plant things without expecting anyone to notice and get noticed anyway. It happened on a Sunday. The sun was slow that day, stretching long shadows across Grace's porch. Logan was repairing a loose board on the fence. Scout nearby, chewing lazily on a stick. Then a knock at the front door. Grace opened it. A woman stood there. Mid-50s, civilian clothes, military posture. Eyes that had seen deployment, divorce, and probably death. But today they held something else. Recognition. "I'm looking for Logan Wells," she said. "I'm his sister." Grace blinked. "He's out back." The woman nodded. "Can I just sit a moment first?" Grace led her to the porch swing, poured her a glass of water, said nothing. Minutes passed before Logan rounded the corner. He saw her, stopped, didn't run, didn't speak, just took one slow step forward. "I thought you were done with me," he said finally. His sister shook her head. "I wasn't done waiting." Logan lowered himself onto the porch step. Scout rested his head on Logan's knee. And Grace. She stepped back inside because sometimes the most generous thing you can do is leave room for people to find their way back to each other. No noise, no tears, just two siblings. One, silence. And the long overdue beginning of something unbroken. After his sister left, Logan didn't say much. He sat on the edge of Grace's porch, one foot tapping against the step. Scout curled beside him as if they'd rehearsed the position for years. Grace brought him tea, left it near his hand, sat down a few feet away. The silence wasn't heavy, just full. After a while, Logan said, "You know what no one tells you?" Grace waited. "That sometimes surviving feels harder than anything that tried to kill you." He didn't look at her when he said it. "But I'm tired of surviving. I want to exist." Grace didn't give him a speech, didn't offer hope like a bumper sticker. She just said, "Existing's allowed here. We do it all the time." Logan cracked a smile. The kind that didn't need to reach his eyes to be real. Later that night he walked the garden, alone. Touched each plant like it might speak back. He didn't pick anything, just stood among things that had learned how to grow again. And when Grace glanced out the window, she saw him there, hands in his pockets, head tilted to the stars, not healed, not whole, but present. And that, in its own quiet way, was a kind of miracle. It arrived on a Wednesday. No return address, handwritten, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a coupon for mulch. Grace opened it at the kitchen counter while the kettle boiled and Scout gnawed on an old tennis ball near Lily's feet. Inside, a single page. "Dear Ms. Monroe, on behalf of the Veteran Resilience Network of Eastern Pennsylvania, we would be honored if you would consider serving as a community advisor to our civilian support initiative. We've heard pieces of what you've done not from you, but from those who were changed by your presence. You don't need credentials. Just your story, your time, your way of showing up. Enclosed is our contact. There is no pressure, but sometimes the quiet ones are the reason others speak again. With gratitude, VRN." Grace stood there for a moment, a letter in hand, steam curling behind her. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just placed the letter on the table beside the notes, the seed packets, and the folded napkin from Logan's first visit back. Because this wasn't a reward. It was a recognition of something she already was. And the next morning when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a hero. She just saw herself. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. Grace waited 2 days. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood the weight of saying yes to something real. On the third morning after Lily left for school and Scout fell asleep under the kitchen table, she typed a short email. Subject, Community Advisor. Invitation. I'm not an expert. I'm not trained, but I know how to be still when someone needs to speak. I'm willing to listen and show up. Grace Monroe. She hit send. Then closed the laptop, folded a towel, and went back to her garden. That Saturday, she drove to a modular office on the edge of Wilton. Not a big center, not polished, just an old shipping container turned safe space. Inside, a few chairs, a coffee machine, a corkboard filled with scribbled prayers and half-torn flyers. A woman handed her a name tag. Grace didn't put it on. Instead, she sat beside a man in a camo jacket with shaking hands and said nothing. Just sat, present, grounded. Not to rescue, not to fix, but to prove by existing there without judgment that pain doesn't scare everyone away. And in time, that's how the room began to breathe. Not because she said something profound, but because she didn't need to. At first, Logan just dropped her off. He'd wait outside the building while Grace attended the meetings, one hand on the wheel, the other idly scratching behind Scout's ear. "I'm not ready for the chairs," he once said, "but I'll be nearby." Grace never pushed, never asked again. One week, it rained. Hard. Grace lingered inside longer than usual, chatting with a quiet young vet named Harvey who'd only just spoken for the first time in months. When she walked out, Logan wasn't in the truck. He was inside, back against the wall. Cap pulled low, no name tag, no introduction, just there. The week after that, he sat in a chair. Didn't speak, didn't shift. The third week, someone dropped their coffee. Logan bent down, cleaned it up, and said, "I used to think no one would understand. Turns out, you don't need them to. You just need them to stay." No one clapped, but no one left either. From that day forward, Logan didn't wait outside anymore. And his silence. It wasn't distance now, it was shelter. By late spring, the chairs weren't always enough. Not because the group was advertised, not because anyone pushed flyers into hands, but because word spreads, especially the kind that sounds like, "They'll let you be quiet. They won't make you explain. They won't fix you, they'll sit with you." That was enough. People came and didn't introduce themselves, sat through meetings without saying a word. Some left early, some stayed and cried into their sleeves. A few just stood at the doorway, for weeks, saying nothing. And no one pulled them in. No one waved or asked, "Are you new?" Because here belonging wasn't something you earned. It was something you stepped into when you were ready. One night, a man maybe 30, maybe 50 age, blurred by grief, stood outside the container for nearly an hour. Logan saw him. So did Grace. Neither of them moved. And when the meeting ended, Grace walked past the man and said, "We're here every Tuesday." That was it. The next week he took a chair. Didn't speak. Didn't smile. But when Scout rested his head on the man's boot, the man didn't move away. And somehow that was enough to start. It rained again. Not the soft spring kind, the kind that came sideways, biting through jackets, swallowing sound. Grace was driving home from the diner. Lily was at a friend's. Scout was curled in the passenger seat, dozing, nose twitching with dreams. Then she saw him. On the shoulder of the road, soaked no-umbrella hoodie pulled over his head. Backpack slung low, limping slightly. Something tightened in her chest. She didn't overthink. Didn't ask herself if it was safe. Didn't wonder if it was fate. She slowed the truck. Scout raised his head. Grace rolled down the window. "You okay out here?" The man hesitated, looked unsure, looked like someone who hadn't been asked that question in a very long time. She unlocked the door. "I'm not going far, but you can come as far as I go." He climbed in, wet, silent, worn, no questions, just warmth. And a towel from the back seat, and the smell of cinnamon still on her sleeves. And Grace with her hands on the wheel and her heart steady, knowing she wasn't repeating history. She was living the truth that had always guided her. You don't have to save the world. Just don't ignore the part of it standing in front of you. Grace Monroe was never on the news. She didn't write a book, didn't build a foundation, didn't go viral. But in a town most people never heard of, things changed because one woman stopped for a wounded dog in the rain. She didn't need to know who he belonged to. She didn't ask what it would cost. She didn't wait for permission. She just opened the door. And that moment, that quiet human moment, became the first stitch in a long, invisible thread that wove a man back into a life, that gave strangers permission to speak, that built a garden, that created a table, that gave silence a home. Grace never called herself brave, but she showed up when it mattered. She gave without asking. She stayed when others left. She listened when no one else knew how, and because of her, others did too. Sometimes the loudest change begins with the quietest person, and sometimes all it takes is someone like you to stop, to see, to stay. This story is dedicated to the ones who act without applause, love without reward, and plant seeds in places no one else thought to tend. Because one simple woman changed everything, and you might be next. Subscribe for more kind woman stories where kindness isn't just comfort, it's legacy.